My name is Dennis Whittlesey. I am a lawyer from Washington, D.C., and tonight, almost everybody I met, including some former students who have heard me speak to his classes, said, "Now, how did you guys ever get together?" In 1978, I had filed a lawsuit in federal court in Portland seeking to attain fishing rights for the non-recognized Chinook Indians of an obscure band, the Wakaikum Band of Chinook Indians, seeking to fish on the Columbia River at a time when fishing was closed. One morning we had a staff meeting. It's approximately 90 days, as I recall, after we'd filed the lawsuit. And we sat around and someone said, "Well, what are you going to do about an expert?" And hey, I'm young. I had brown hair then, and even, and Beckham had hair, that's okay. And I said, "What do you mean an expert?" They said, "Well, the state of Oregon is going to come after you because you're suing the two states." And we were indeed suing the Fish and Game Commissions of both states, Oregon and Washington. I said, "You're really going to have to find somebody, and you've got to do it now." So I go back to my office in my large law firm in Washington, D.C., and I'm sitting there pondering, as I often did, with a cup of coffee. It's wine later on in the day, but it was coffee at that hour of the day. And I get a phone call. And my secretary says, "There's somebody calling from Oregon." And I didn't get the name, but he was from a school, he said, that I'd never heard of, the secretary, nor had I, by the way. And he wants to talk to you and says it's important. Well, it's easy for those of us, and my good friend Bob Klonoff, a dean, I'm sure there've been calls he didn't take, and there are calls I haven't taken, but for some reason, I took that call. And it was this almost plaintive plea from this voice, and he said, "My name is Stephen Dow Beckham." He's always, as you know, Stephen Dow Beckham. And he said, "I'm a history professor at Lewis and Clark College." We didn't have internet then. I couldn't look up Lewis and Clark College. And he said, "I have just spent the last 3 or 4 weeks being courted by the Attorney General of the state of Oregon to oppose your lawsuit. And they've sent me all the pleadings, and that's how I knew how to find you. And I've researched it, and I've met with the Senior Deputy Attorney General, Beverly B. Hall was her name, for those who can remember that." And he said, "And I told her yesterday that I didn't believe in her case, that I thought you were right." And he was calling to offer services. I know I can get through this. Well, we took the case. We took Beckham. Hell, he was all we had. However, I got out here quickly and discovered this remarkable talent. The Chinooks fished by the time we got through. Now, I'm supposed to have only 4 minutes, and those of you who have heard me speak at his classes know there's no way I can do anything in 4 minutes. But I have to address the historical materials question because it was mentioned by my predecessor. And I spoke to a lot of Steve's classes over the year, and I remember the first time I went into that class and I spoke about whatever we were doing. And by the way, we've worked continuously since 1978. He's not just a colleague, he's my friend, he's my pal, he's family. And by the way, you do owe me a report, right? You've got one. Okay, just want to be sure he remembers that. And I remember being in this class, and it was this energetic class, and we were doing something that really did involve historical materials, and we were discussing to the class how we were using these materials in the courtroom. And Steve thought it was important that students understand exactly what the value of their work was. And in this case, it was for use in the courtroom. And one of the things that I remember we talked about was how we met and how Many people regard expert witnesses as basically witnesses for hire. Let me tell you, Beckham was not a witness for hire, as the state of Oregon discovered. And in fact, many a time, I'd say, now Beckham, here's what we want to do. Being the advocate that I am, he'd say, well, I can't say that. I'd say, what do you mean? He'd say, I can't say that. And we quickly developed this song and dance. Well, how can we best achieve the result? The result was that we once had a case where Beckham wrote reports and the federal government lawyer asked him 4 questions and stopped and said, I think we can settle this case, because his work was impenetrable on cross-examination. So we're describing all this to these students in this historical materials class, and it was a great class, energetic, and Steve said, all right, now we've got to talk about your work. And I sat there and listened to him tell them what it was they were going to be doing for the next 24 hours, and it sounded like the Bataan death march of history classes. And they all left. I said, Steve, how many are going to come back tomorrow? He said, oh, they'll have it all done. Mike said this wasn't supposed to be a roast, but I really have to share with you the darkest story of Beckham's life. It's just really, it's a horrible story. It's the day Beckham almost killed a man. And I mean almost killed a man. We had a lawsuit, and in my world, any lawsuit that I'm in, my pal's going to be with me because I can't do it without him. And it was a guy suing the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua, a tribe that has given a lot of money to this school because of us. And he was a guy that was a terribly flawed individual, but I mean, the things that he had done to his body were evidenced by the fact that at a relatively young age he lived with oxygen tubes, and he couldn't breathe. And we saw his police record, his arrest record, that I can't describe because we didn't really see it. But the nicest thing that we didn't see was, you know, obstruction of justice involving crimes involving minors. That was the nicest one. And so on the eve of the trial, this guy we also knew claimed to have a submachine gun. This was several years ago when submachine guns were the ultimate in weaponry. A threat was phoned in the courthouse, and they said basically that Beckham and Whittlesey will never leave Eugene, Oregon together alive. And this was on the eve of the trial. And I got a call from the head of the Marshal Service, the head of the federal courts, the judge was on the phone, and said, we're prepared to make sure that this is secure. And do you want to go forward, but we're prepared to postpone this trial? Well, now anyone who knows me knows I'm a total wuss. I mean, you know, I don't do danger, I don't scare myself, but it had taken us a long, long time to get this case to trial, and it was nasty, obviously. And I said, all right, let's do it. So long before 9/11, in the federal courthouse in Eugene, Oregon, there was the first perimeter of security outside the building with magnetometers. We then went in, we had to check in, we had to go through a second set of magnetometers to get up to the courthouse, get up to the courtroom, and there was a third set of magnetometers to go into the courtroom. And we get in, and they bring in our plaintiff, the guy with the oxygen, only because of the circumstances, he wasn't allowed to carry his oxygen tank in. He had 50-yard oxygen tubes out to the tanks outside the courtroom. And so we get into this trial, which, by the way, we did win, but that's irrelevant because this really was Beckham's darkest day. There was a recess, and we stand up, and we're talking. We're kind of walking around, and Steve does it, takes a step back. And we're standing there talking, and all of a sudden we hear this. And we look down, and Beckham is standing on the oxygen tubes. Keeping with the moment, one of our clients yelled out, Beckham, don't move. And he didn't. It's been a wonderful ride for me. It's not over. As I say, he does owe me a report, and we've got a new one coming up because we're about to have a great victory involving a tribe in Northern California. It's not over. He's retired from here, but he hasn't retired from the world. He hasn't retired from me, and I'm not retiring. So anyway, I want to thank Steve, and I would say, and I told him walking in, one of the nicest things about having worked with him is to have gotten to know this wonderful school. Thank you.